Thank you very much for being here. It's a great pleasure to have you here opening our conference this morning. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with a very big picture question about AI. Just give us a sense of how a country like Singapore thinks about it. Singapore has a fascinating history of the last few decades of constantly reinventing itself to stay competitive. But there are some things at AI that are alarming people about deep fakes and about privacy. So when you think about AI, do you think of it as like a new opportunity to retool your economy, or do you think of it as a risk or something that needs to be managed, a threat even?
I think in this audience, it's very well known that Singapore at the economic level is already operating on a very high base. So for any of the companies that are in Singapore, they have to be very competitive. And this cuts across financial services, cuts across manufacturing, and all the other sectors that are successful in Singapore. So when we think about AI, we think about its potential to raise productivity, its potential for precision in the way things are done, and I think also greatly personalization. So in our context, of course, there are many countries that would like to gain a leadership in AI, for example, by making sure that they are involved in the development of the most cutting-edge frontier models. We adopt a different approach. The approach that we want to put emphasis on is in terms of enterprise use. We want to see many use cases being experimented upon. And it is this emphasis on having real activities, companies, organizations, feeling that they can benefit from the use of AI tools that drives the way we think about AI. So when we put together the National AI Strategy, it is updated to take into account the prospects of generative AI, but more importantly, it emphasizes on growing the level of activity in Singapore. And so the AI adoption has to be in sync with the kind of talent that is also being brought into the Singapore ecosystem, as well as the development of the various guardrails that need to be put in place. So very much an opportunity, provided we also find ways to ensure that there is AI safety, provided we also ensure that the risks that societies are very concerned about are well taken care of.
So you're not thinking purely in terms of your tech sector. This is the economy as a whole you're thinking.
Absolutely. In fact, some of the most interesting use cases are found elsewhere. We had this observation when we were trying to grow our digital economy. It is not only in the infocoms and communications sector where you see the most exciting activities. When we try to measure the size of our digital economy, a very significant portion is contributed by digitalized activities happening across financial services, healthcare, manufacturing. So, in fact, many banks in Singapore today will think of themselves as being technology companies. And if you take away the brick and mortar expressions of a bank and even the way we interact with them online, you will see that that is indeed the case. So it has to percolate to the other aspects of our society.
So you mentioned the National AI Strategy. You were one of the first countries, I think, to come out with an AI strategy way back in 2019, which seems an awful long time ago in the AI world. And you updated it or a new one at the end of last year. What's the one big lesson you think you've drawn from that you would give advice to other countries? And what's maybe the one thing you might have changed your mind about?
Well, I would say maybe not advice, but maybe from the point of view of what you need to put in place. AI is incredibly expensive. The initial investments to build it up at the model level. And also, subsequently, when you try to fine-tune the models and make them useful in your enterprise context, in your organizational context, you've got to constantly be thinking about the benefits. You've got to constantly be thinking about in what way is it helping you to grow markets? In what way is it helping you to reduce costs? And unless you're able to make a business case for it, we don't see this as being a sustainable effort. No company, no organization constantly, invests in a new technology unless it is able to provide some sort of a return. And when you aggregate it across the whole of the economy, I think the same will apply. So we are practical in the way we pursue these things. On the one hand, we invest in research and development, but on the other hand, equally, We want to have emphasis on use cases being experimented upon by all kinds of organizations. And I should say that since we updated the strategy in December last year, I have been very encouraged by the level of activity that's happening. If you take an airline that many will be familiar with, Singapore Airlines, they've decided that they must also think about how AI can help them to optimize their processes. And airline operations are actually very complex. So if they are able to use AI for the purposes of analytics, for the purposes of enhancing the customer experience, that could potentially be very powerful for them. But more important than helping them to move to the next level, I thought what was encouraging was them setting themselves an ambition to be a leader in AI adoption for the airline industry. Now, this type of ambition we also find in financial services companies. So, for example, Prudential in Singapore, even our own homegrown bank, DBS, they have identified hundreds of use cases and are actually actively developing their own AI models to be applied to those use cases. And then I would also say that within the government, there are exciting developments. We decided at the very early stage that for us as policymakers to have a good grasp about the kinds of guardrails that really will be useful, we ourselves have to be users of AI in a very comprehensive and systematic way. We made it clear to government officials that they are welcome to experiment, provided they take ownership and accountability of the results. They cannot just push the problem to the AI and say that if anything happens that is not good, it's the AI's problem. They have to, be able to account for this. And it's gone actually quite far. So, for example, across the whole of the public service, more than 65,000 of our own officers are using a secure version of ChatGPT in order to do things that all governments have to do, for example, transcribe meetings. So from the productivity angle, this is happening at a fast clip. We also have our own platform that enables government officials to design and build their own AI bots. And I'm glad to say that this experimentation has seen several thousand bots built. And this kind of energy, I think it is very much to be encouraged.
Is there any popular backlash in Singapore against any of this? Or are there
I think there will always be a concern. It's not just in Singapore. I was in China recently, and they were telling me how the introduction of robo-taxis in the city of Wuhan met with great pushback because the drivers who were operating private hire vehicles suddenly felt that their livelihoods may be at stake. So there is of great concern to people, particularly knowledge workers, white-collar workers, who feel that in the past, when we talk about technology, when we talk about automation, it's likely to be blue-collar workers, rank-and-file workers who are going to be affected. But in today's context with AI, with generative AI in particular, it could be their own jobs at risk. And there have been studies that would say that because of the high percentage of professionals, managers, executives, and technicians in our workforce, then we are much more exposed. But we kind of think of it differently, and we want to enable our people to think of it differently. I think the competition is not necessarily between humans and AIs. It's going to be much more a human that is AI-enabled versus a human that does not have the ability to work with AI. So the way in which we would want to go about it is to try and strengthen the skills development process to ensure that not only are we growing a pool of AI practitioners, and by that we mean data scientists, machine learning engineers, but also for the entire workforce to be able to make use of AI tools and feel confident in using these tools. So that is the effort that we have started to invest in.
And can you do that with do you need migration to do that? Do you need to bring in skilled people from outside, or can you do that with training of people within the country?
You will always need a combination of both. But in fact, I should say that many of the leading tech companies in Singapore are very much a part of this effort. So you take Microsoft. Clearly, they have an interest to ensure that there are enough people in the workforce that are able to use Copilot. So they have committed, for example, to train, I believe it's more than 10,000 people in Singapore. In the Singapore context, with a workforce of 3.5 million, 10,000 is not small. And then I think you take a company like Oregon or Google, they're all very much invested in these kinds of efforts. And so we see that in a matter of 3 to 5 years, it's entirely possible that many more members of our workforce will gain confidence in the use of AI tools. There is no other way to, assure people that their livelihoods need not be at stake. In fact, it will give them the potential to advance further in their careers. And I think all people, whether they are operating at a junior level or at a senior level, want to see some form of career advancement and growth. And we'd like to find a way to let the mastery of AI skills be a way forward for them.
You mentioned guardrails a couple of times. Do you need new laws or new regulations in Singapore to be able to weigh the way you might to regulate the potential for deep fakes or fake news?
The short answer is yes and no. If you're concerned about the potential risks of discrimination, for example, if you have workplace legislation in place against discrimination for fairness, those kinds of laws very often can be applied, no matter how the discrimination comes about. So even if it is an algorithm that caused discrimination in the recruitment process, the law should be able to accommodate it. It should be technology agnostic in that sense. Singapore is also one of the few countries in the world that has a law against fake news. We do not remove the content that is being challenged, but we require a clarification to be put alongside that offending content, and then people can judge for themselves. Again, it doesn't matter how that misinformation is generated. Even if it was generated with the help of artificial intelligence, the law can still apply. So in that sense, quite a number of the laws that already exist may be able to deal with the risks that are being brought about by the use of AI. But there will be certain instances where additional guardrails will be needed. So for example, this is a year of elections, and one just took place,
just yesterday.
Just yesterday, with results that everyone is concerned about. I was just watching television, and it was reporting about the results in North Carolina and how misinformation may have played a part. So misinformation in the context of elections is particularly tricky and also of great concern. Our parliament passed a new law just last month that would make it a criminal offense for anyone to depict a candidate doing something that he did not do or saying something that he did not say during an election period. So those are the kind of additional guardrails that may be needed, because we see that AI can be used to generate these kinds of content, and then when put online, these can viral very easily. Now, we will continue to look at instances where the risks of AI are not adequately dealt with by existing laws. But I wouldn't say that at the outset we start off being able to know exactly where the AI is being applied. That will have wide impact, that will require new guardrails. Mm-hmm. We adopt the approach of being very watchful and being able to respond to it in an agile and quick fashion.
And does there need to be a global discussion about this as well?
Absolutely. We can't do this ourselves. But sometimes, global discussions take a lot longer. So we have to move when we are able to. And hopefully what we do can serve as a useful reference point. We don't know for a fact that the guardrails we put in place will be adequate, but we are very open to sharing it with our colleagues around the world and then to improve them, as well as to contribute to the conversation. Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of the discussion about AI in recent months has focused on data centers and the infrastructure needed to support the industry. Mm-hmm. Singapore, it's a small country, not overabundant in renewable energy resources. How are you going to manage to stay competitive in that part of the AI sphere?
You are absolutely right. We started thinking about this, and one observation to make in the first place is that relative to our GDP, relative to the size of our population, if you look at the amount of data center capacity in Singapore, it's already one of the densest in Asia. So, that's where we start from. But at the same time, we understand that as the AI workloads become more pervasive, then surely, in terms of data center capacity, we will also need to have some headroom for growth. And that's why, for about 18 months, from about 18 months ago, we decided to go on a pathway. We put in place a roadmap towards greener data centers. And essentially, there are two things that you can do to make the data centers greener. They can use less energy, or they can use greener energy. And we are pursuing both pathways. In terms of using less energy, data centers typically will have a 15-year cycle. There will always be a need for tech refresh. So when the cycle comes for existing data centers, there will be an opportunity for them to level up. In terms of new data centers that are coming on stream, then these higher thresholds and requirements can already apply. Now, the area that is, of course, interesting that we will continue to look at is how renewable energy can be part of the energy mix that goes into the powering of data centers. So that's also an area of active investigation. For that, we work together with the companies. We also work together with our research community to try and identify pathways forward. So it's something that we have thought about for quite some time, and we will continue to build on.
But at a strategic level, do you need to have the data centers within Singapore, or could you operate having data centers elsewhere?
Absolutely interesting question. We had to deal with this question with manufacturing. Singapore is not big enough for the entire supply chain to be within Singapore. Some parts of the value chain are very valuable, and they can be hosted in Singapore because it plays to our advantage. So, for example, we've got very efficient logistics. It's an international maritime center. It's also an international air hub. So for high-value components that need to, be shipped out or flown to other facilities, then Singapore is a good place. Singapore is also a trusted hub where intellectual property is strictly observed, and intellectual property rights can be defended. And so I think from the company standpoint, certain activities are very advantageous to host in Singapore in spite of our cost structure. I believe that the same will happen for AI workloads. You will notice that in the region, and I think the FT has reported on this before too, that there are many data center investments that are taking place in Malaysia, in Thailand, in Indonesia. And you could potentially see this as a grid operating together, and it will be very much up to hyperscalers as well as companies that have got a regional footprint to decide where they will distribute their AI workloads. And I think this is how we can continue to be competitive.
Coming to the end of our time, maybe we can end with a little bit of geopolitics, if I may. A lot of the discussion about AI is often framed in terms of the competition between the two big beasts in America and China are the two big competitors. Where does that leave Singapore? Does that leave you in a difficult position, caught in between, or is that actually an opportunity as one of the few countries that actually has good access to both of those countries, in a sense?
We've worked well with both countries, and actually, internationally, they are not the only two countries that we interact with. So to give you an example, with the US, we have a dialogue on critical and emerging technologies. It's gone well, and it allows us to identify areas that we can strengthen our collaboration on. AI safety is one of those areas. In fact, later this month, there is an inaugural meeting of the International AI Safety Institutes taking place in San Francisco, and Singapore is part of that conversation. With China, we have a digital policy dialogue. This has also gone on quite well. Among other things, we are interested in how the Chinese look at AI needs to be regulated, especially when it comes to content that affect societal harmony and cohesion. That's an area that we both have an interest in. But I should also say that it's perhaps too narrow to just look at our relationship with these two countries. There is a large community of interested stakeholders. So you take, for example, countries in the global south. Everyone wants to see how to benefit most from AI. And so in support of this effort, we came up with an AI playbook for small states. This is also in support of our role as the convener of the Forum of Small States. Within ASEAN, I should say that the digital ministers understand each other's priorities, and also have a commitment building on what we've been able to do together in cybersecurity to advance on AI development. So among other things, we at the ASEAN level have an agreement on what kinds of AI deployment should be encouraged in order to meet ethical standards. We have a data management framework, and we're working towards strengthening cooperation at the AI ecosystem growth level. There is, of course, a foundation of digital economy agreement. There is already in discussion, a quite advanced discussion for a digital economy framework among ASEAN countries. So I would say that I see this as a really important part of our engagements. After all, our stated ambition is AI for the public good for Singapore and the world. So it means that we, expect to make our own contribution just as much as we will benefit from global developments.
That's a fantastic note to end it. I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time. So I'm going to hand you back to Nikki to introduce the next session. But before then, if I could ask you to thank Minister Josephine Teo for a fantastic presentation.